Welcome back, nerds. Fino here with a guide for Count Alessandro di Cagliostro. And here's a fun fact. Italians are big on silent G's, meaning I've been butchering the name of my favorite Lupin movie this entire time. Cagliostro is a 4-star story-locked pretender introduced in id, the second Ordeal Call chapter. And given how gimmicky and uneven the pretender class is, there might just be room for Alessandro di Gigachad to fit in. Let's see how that pans out. Cagliostro's Noble Phantasm is Ribellione al Mondo, an AoE art attack that preemptively purges defensive buffs. Its overcharge is tied to anti-lawful damage, and once all this is resolved, it applies a fixed magnitude defense reduction after damage has been calculated. Oh yeah, small detail. This NP is also a literal eyesore, because Cagliostro does his best Porygon impression, so maybe not the best character if you're playing in bed with the lights off. Being an AoE arts pretender has some inherent advantages. First of all, even though he does less single turn damage in neutral encounters and with equal CEs, he's much more capable of leveraging Black Grail over multiple turns than someone like Talalak or 9 Tattoo Eliza. Another bonus for Cagliostro is that he's one of only 2 AoE arts pretenders, and his competition is Dante. Italian Dante, not to be confused with the French Dantes. Dante has certain prerogatives as a 5-star servant, but the downside is that he's much more expensive to acquire multiple copies of, so this situation positions Cagliostro as the more economical option. For one, having an anti-buff that scales off overcharge is one hell of a feature for a 4-star servant. What's doubly nice is that all of the playable Sakura 5 alter egos have lawful alignments, and a good portion of the other alter egos are also lawful, so you're often doubly rewarded for taking Cagliostro into fights where he has true class advantage. And let's not forget that of all the card types, Arts is the best position to take advantage of overcharge in the first place. And it's not over yet. As his first skill, Cagliostro has For I Am a Jara, a 50% battery with 3 turns of NP damage, and an AoE confusion debuff, which can proc Skill Seal. The battery alone is worth the price of admission, given how rare a full 50% battery is on a 4-star servant. The catch is that because NP damage is on the same skill, you're punished for holding it on wave 1, when you'd ideally be using Castoria batteries instead to stack her effects. Also, Asjara has a 7-turn cooldown, which is on the high side. Another important skill is Oriental Martial Arts. This one grants 3 turns of arts and crit buffs, and an on-hit effect to reduce debuff resistance for a single turn on normal attacks. You'll want to level it second for those steroids. Lastly, there's Althotus Continuum. This is Cagliostro's defensive skill, giving him a tremendous 10k guts that lasts for 5 turns. When this guts is activated, he gets 30% charge. On top of all this, it comes with 5 turns of NP gain. Seems like a pretty good deal, right? Well, it comes with a pretty big caveat. The second you activate Althotus Continuum, it goes on a 10-turn cooldown. That's a 5-turn gap in the coverage of its effects, and you're incentivized to pop it immediately for that NP gain. Even if you factor in Castoria's defensive abilities, that's still a pretty big gap where your team has to coast on lingering anti-enforcement stacks. The extremely punishing length of his cooldowns is one of the ways that Cagliostro's otherwise heavy-hitting kit is balanced out. This pushes you towards leveling all his skills to 10, which not only eats up lores, but requires a significant number of golden cauldrons from Ordeal Call 2. Another is that his skill set is very selfish, with only a few trifling effects that could benefit other members in any way. Because of this, he's often a poor choice for 90++ team building, despite having that desirable 50% battery and overcharge anti-buff. This tends to corral him into boss fights where you're up against some combination of alter egos, berserkers, and multiple knight-class servants. That's the logic I was functioning under when I took him into the Poseidon Super Recollection quest. Not an alter ego fight, unfortunately, but multiple enemy alter ego fights aren't exactly common. The upside was that both Chiron and the Poseidon Core were lawful alignment, so I could leverage that bonus damage to compensate for the lack of 2x class advantage. The problem I encountered was that, at Super Recollection health values, getting multiple bar breaks was hard. Really hard. Those damage checks were brutal, and if I whiffed even a single time, it was a catastrophe. Remember, Cagliostro has longer than average cooldowns, so taking an extra turn to finish off a break bar is a major time loss. His skill effect magnitudes would give you the impression that you have room to fuck around, but in practice it's actually the reverse. Either you get the 3-turn kill, or you're stuck hunkering down for a long while. For the latter situation, servants like Tamamo no Mae can help you achieve your second win sooner, but I prefer Lady Avalon in general. Not only can she overcharge Cagliostro, but her defensive suite gives you an extra layer of idiot proofing if your big offensive comes to a grinding halt. For equipment, I've already mentioned Black Grail, and the other options are the usual suspects: Ocean Flyer, Formal Craft, or whatever arts package you have that's the strongest. Nothing special there. For command codes, you can either go with gimmick countering picks, or try out some flat star CCs. Those help to get mileage out of Oriental Martial Arts and one of his passives, which gives arts crit damage. Also helps if you run in with Lady Avalon. For append skills, focus on starting charge for generally being the best append, followed by cooldown reduction to make his second wind slightly less punishing. It's also worth noting that Cagliostro has a passive, which grants a small amount of purge resistance. It's not a big enough number to lean on, but once in a while he'll tank an attack that would have otherwise removed his guts, letting you bounce back for a few more turns. Alessandro di Cagliostro is a useful servant in FGO's mid-game, if you pull him on raid up, and a situationally good boss fight attacker. You'll find a lot of encounters that he's usable in, but admittedly he's rarely optimal for any given situation. The guy's got powerful tools, though these come at a price. Long cooldowns, poor 90++ energy, and a class that can be awkward to utilize, especially in fights that cross the Knight Cavalry class divide. But when he does fit into a strategy, he can put on quite a show. He appears on the Count of Monte Cristo banner at first, but it's worth noting that Cagliostro shows up again down the road, attached to class banners for Draco, Dante, and New Olga Marie as well, though he doesn't stay on Dracos for future versions of the clusterfuck banners. Would I go out of my way to get Cagliostro? Probably not. But if you pick up a few copies while rolling for any of the above, you could easily roll with those punches and get him powered up. And the guy does have his uses. Story time. Usual disclaimer, I'm not a historian. I just like interesting stories. Though even if I were a historian, I think I'd have a hard time with this guy. Alessandro di Cagliostro led a life where the details can get quite murky, and it doesn't help that a lot of the historical record on the guy was written by his enemies. With that in mind, the story of Count Cagliostro begins in Sicily, where a boy named Giuseppe Balsamo would often find himself in trouble. Hoping that a religious upbringing would help the boy find some semblance of order, he was sent off to a monastery. There he learned quite a bit about medicines and how to make them. This would spark a lifetime of interest in peripheral subjects, though his teachers couldn't have foreseen the direction that would take him. What happened next is one of those murky bits I talked about. One rumor is that he got a little too creative and started selling the monastery's goods for cash. Another is that he clearly didn't give two shits about the religious half of his education. But regardless of why, he left or was kicked out of the monastery. While bumming around and getting increasingly accustomed to the seedy underside of society, Giuseppe realized that a lot of suckers wanted the service of an alchemist. One particular mark got duped into giving him a sizable amount of gold as upfront payment for his services as an infinite money glitch. The man really just bought himself the world's most expensive beating. But given the magnitude of this robbery, Giuseppe had to skip town. Now, with a good bit of cash, he went on a tour of Greece and the Near East, where he studied alchemy and the mystic arts, whether out of some genuine interest or to make his future cons more convincing. Also forgery, which definitely wasn't related to the spiritual world. He then returned to the West, adopting the name Alessandro di Cagliostro, a count. The name Cagliostro was cribbed from one of his relatives. In Rome, he used his medical knowledge to set up shop and even became attached to the retinue of a cardinal. During his time in the Old City, Cagliostro married a girl named Serafina, who quickly adapted to the life of a con artist. But the metaphorical honeymoon wouldn't last. People were starting to get suspicious of the supposed count, so the pair skipped town, with their escape eventually taking them to England. Here, Cagliostro met a fellow who introduced him to Freemasonry. Now, Freemasons are well outside of my wheelhouse, so I can't give much info on that front, though Cagliostro ultimately became involved in, or perhaps even founded a variety called Egyptian Freemasonry, with a particular focus on rebirth. With this idea system at his disposal, he traveled across Europe. Cagliostro's activities during this period are murky as you'd expect, but the fragments paint a pretty interesting picture. He did seem to take his Freemason activities seriously, and he went around establishing lodges for Egyptian Freemasons, convincing the idle wealthy to buy in. He also kept up with his usual shenanigans, offering his services as an alchemist, a spiritual medium, and so on, selling potions for youth, love, beauty, and other such snake oil. But at the same time, where he'd set up shop, he would apparently help the poor that came to him for medicine, with real medicine at that, making use of his actual knowledge from his time at the monastery and paying the costs out of his own pocket. Whether this was true altruism or a way to offset any bad press he got from duping his real marks, who knows? You might be tempted to see a Robin Hood-esque figure in him, stealing from rich idiots to help the poor. Also himself. Helping himself was pretty important. Eventually, the Cagliostros made their way to France and they set up shop in Paris, doing the usual business. A little medicine, a little magic, a little Freemasonry. And the French elite took a shine to him, letting him make appearances at the royal court. Supposedly, the count even made an acquaintance of Benjamin Franklin during this period. The man did love Parisian high society. Then came the diamond necklace affair. The full story is best left for another day, but I'll give you the short version. There was a really gaudy, really heavy, and extremely expensive necklace that some jewelers wanted to sell Queen Marie Antoinette. She didn't want it for the longest time. Well, a certain Cardinal Rohan was on the outs with the Queen and wanted to return to her favor. He was approached by a friend of Marie's who said he should buy the necklace and present it to the Queen to get back in her good graces. He dutifully did so and gave this friend the necklace for delivery. She fucks off to England because she wasn't a friend, but instead a con artist. When Rohan tries to ask for compensation, the truth comes out, and it turns into a massive incident. Suspects are rounded up, and Count Cagliostro is caught in the dragnet. Here's the funny part. There's a strong chance Cagliostro had absolutely nothing to do with the diamond necklace affair. Yeah, he had forging skills, and at one point the Queen's signature had been improperly forged, but no one could prove Cagliostro is the one who did it. And it's not like Paris had any shortage of other forgers. He was just in the wrong place at the wrong time because he was trying to finesse the Cardinal, just not for the diamond necklace. Rohan had a sick relative whose illness wasn't receptive to the treatment of his doctors, so he turned to the purported mystical healing of the good Count. And it worked, which gave Cagliostro a place in the Cardinal's retinue. He was possibly setting up some sort of long-term con on the gullible Rohan, but he didn't realize just how gullible the man was, and someone else cashed out first. Fortunately for Cagliostro, no one could actually tie him to the crime, because it wasn't him for once, and he was found innocent. But a fuming Louis XVI wouldn't let him get off scot-free. Rohan was forced out of Paris and Cagliostro was exiled from France altogether. Back in London, a journalist had gotten some very interesting information. He'd learned the name Giuseppe Balsamo, and through his contacts, dug up information on all the shit Cagliostro got up to back in his Sicilian days. If the Count didn't pay up, he'd air his dirty laundry. Now this was all true, and could easily ruin Cagliostro. But he didn't turn to threats or trickery this time. No, he had a much more effective weapon to suppress the truth. England's world-famous legal system. Cagliostro sued the hell out of his blackmailer and forced him to retract his claims, which had been published once the Count refused to play along. It would be a Pyrrhic victory. Once brought out into the open, those rumors ate away at Cagliostro's reputation, and it became difficult to conduct business in London. To lick their wounds, Mr. and Mrs. Cagliostro returned to Rome. But in doing so, they broke one of the major rules of being career conmen: never return to the scene of the crime. They'd popped up on the Inquisition's radar before, and when they tried to establish a Masonic lodge, they were approached by undercover inquisitors and apprehended in a sting operation. Serafina, his wife, sold Alessandro out in exchange for her own freedom. No honor among thieves, even married ones it seems. Cagliostro had essentially done a sampler pack of heresy on the Pope's doorstep, and with Serafina's testimony, he was fucked. The Count was convicted and sentenced to death, but the Pope gave him a break and downgraded his punishment to life imprisonment. That wasn't good enough for Cagliostro, and he made a daring escape, but we know little about it aside from the fact that it failed. And this time he was sent to a far more foreboding cage to live out his days in isolation. There would be no way out, and Count Alessandro di Cagliostro would soon expire in darkness. While his reputation plummeted in his later years and after his death, future occultists would find him an inspiring figure, including Helena Blavatsky and Aleister Crowley, the latter of whom claimed to be the reincarnation of many historical mystics, including Cagliostro himself. And while not an occultist, Johann von Goethe took an interest in his story, and he went around interviewing people who knew the false Count during his lifetime. So there's some speculation that the life of Count Cagliostro may have influenced Goethe's own take on the Faust story, specifically the character of Mephistopheles, who also possesses both the power to grant wishes and a formidable talent for manipulation. So how did you enjoy the story of Count Cagliostro? This weekend I've got some spice lined up over on the stream. Super Battle Golf with the lads on Friday, Honkai Star Rail Sparksy rolls and Blue Archive Magical Girl rolls on Saturday, and finally the Count of Monte Cristo rolls on Sunday, in the good old FGO. You won't want to miss it. Twitch.tv/Finotaisen, 3 p.m. Pacific Time. See you there.